Hey Gurus, and welcome back to the Disaster Recovery series. In this fourth installment video, we're going to set up the Ansible inventory files as well as the Ansible Vault files. The inventory files are used by Ansible to set up the information for Ansible to know who is the primary and who is the receiver host, as well as any other information that might be needed, such as the common name of the SSL server certificates, any IP ranges that are needed for the Postgres port, and any firewall network zones that need to be specified. And then the vault files are used by Ansible to set up the SSL encryption settings for the Postgres communication. So in there, we'll set the supply method. And so far in this demo, we've used the manual method. So we'll set that in this file as well as the security level. And this is where you'll set your verify full or verify CA or require. And then once those files are set up, we'll start up the disaster recovery playbook to enable disaster recovery. And then once that's up and running, we'll run some commands to check the status of our disaster recovery system. So let's get started by setting up the inventory files. So over here on the primary system, we're going to copy the inventory template into our inventories folder within the Ansible directory. When moving the inventory files, make sure to rename the file to a name that represents that machine. So in this instance, we're going to do soar hosts primary machine.yaml. Now that that file is copied over, let's go ahead and VI into it to set it up. Now while this file may look overwhelming, there's only a few things we need to change to set up this inventory file. First is this master host. This is the primary system. You can either use the IP address or the fully qualified domain name. And remember, within VI, you press the I key to change to insert mode. And that allows you to edit the file. So we've set up the primary or master host and then the receiver host as well, which is our disaster recovery system in this instance. Next, we go down to this invars master host and we do the same thing. And this is looking only the fully qualified domain name. Same for the receiver host. Next up is setting up this firewall D range. This is used by the master host only to set up a firewall D rule for the Postgres port. So on my network, it's a 192.168.4. Now, if we wanted to do just IP address, we could do a /32, but in this instance, since it's just a demo environment, I'll do the whole subnet. Next is where you could specify the network zone for that firewall D Postgres connection rule. The default is set to internal. For this, we will leave it like that. But if you have firewall D set up on your system using a different network zone, then this is where you would specify what that zone will be. And then the last field here, the inventory vars Postgres SSL certs vault file. You only need to specify this variable if you've used the supply method for the Postgres for SSL certificates, but since we did the manual method in this demo, that we don't need to set this up as the files are already where they need to be. So let's go ahead and save this. First, we'll hit the escape key to exit insert mode, and then we'll right quit. And now that that's set up, we need to copy it over to the secondary system. So we'll use SCP to do that. And we'll copy it over to This will also go in the inventories directory on the other system. There we go. And as you may have noticed, I wasn't prompted for a password. That's because we set up those SSH keys in the beginning and shared it across systems. You'll see here it did give me a warning for adding an IP address, and that's just because since I am using DHCP, my IP has changed since I've started this system up. Now we'll go over to the other system and do the same thing. And just like with the first system, we're going to give this a custom name so that they are indistinguishable. Now from the secondary or DR machine, the master host for this inventory file will be the DR machine. And the receiver host will be the primary machine. And we're setting this file up just in case that there is a DR situation, that this file will then be used as the primary inventory file. So this allows for replication to happen back to the primary system when the switch happens.
That's that. Escape. Right. Quit.
We'll CP that over back to the primary system. There we go. If we do a ls of the inventories directory, we'll see both files are there. Same thing on the primary machine. Perfect. Now let's move on to setting up the Ansible Vault files. So starting on the primary system here, we're going to copy the template over. Vault.template over to user share. I'm going to put it in the group vars folder under the old directory and call it Vault. Now we open it up. So here in the Vault file at the top, we'll see some global variables. The first one is the SSH timeout. The default here is 180 minutes. The second is the polling interval, which is 15 seconds by default. You can modify those if needed. For example, if you have a very large database, it may take longer than 180 minutes for it to replicate across the two systems. So you may have to increase the timeout setting. But we're going to move down here to the SSL setup for Postgres. For the Vault SSL cert supply method, we're going to leave that as manual since we manually set the certificate files in their respective directories. But if you followed the supply method where you set up the supply files, then you would put supply here. Next is the Vault root CN. We don't need to worry about that since we're not using the generate setting. Down here for the security level, this is where you'll set verify full, verify CA, or require. going to use require in this instance, since I am using self-signed certs. Scrolling down, under Postgres setup, we'll leave this as default as our Postgres directory is at this path. Service name, we need to set a replication database password here. This password is used by the system when it creates the Postgres replication user. Password should be used when the receiver appliances is connecting to the master appliance to replicate Postgres data. So let's go ahead and create a password here. But one caveat is do not use these characters as it will interfere with the ability for Postgres to operate correctly. Must be a limitation with the Postgres system. But for this, I'm just going to use my simple little password here. Now this file will be encrypted using the Ansible Vault, as we have with other files that have sensitive information. So this will not sit in clear text on the system. And that's all the settings we need to change here. So let's go ahead and hit escape and right quit. Now we need to activate our Ansible environment. Using Ansible Vault. After going into that folder. Ansible Vault, encrypt, Vault. Give it the same Vault password that you've been using this whole time. There we go. And now go to the secondary or DR system and perform the same actions. All right, now that the vault file is set up on the secondary system or the DR system, let's go ahead and go back to the primary system. And we can now activate the disaster recovery enable playbook to start up disaster recovery. Before we get started, we want to make sure we're in the user share resilient-dr/Ansible directory. And we are. And then we also want to check that SSH is set up correctly. So we can do that with the Ansible all-i. I'm going to look in the inventories file. We're going to use the primary machine YAML file. And we'll do a -m ping. We'll ask for the vault password. And there we go. We can see that we are able to communicate with the DR and primary systems successfully. So let's go ahead and move forward to enable the disaster recovery playbook. So Ansible -playbook -K-I inventories. That same inventory file. Going to run the enable DR YAML playbook. And we're also going to throw on this extra var variable to skip receiver database backup. And this extra variable of skipping the receiver database backup reduces downtime by not backing up the receiver database. And since we're enabling disaster recovery for the first time, there should be no receiver database. So that is perfectly fine. But in the future, if you need to enable disaster recovery, for example, if you've performed an upgrade and you did a migration over to upgrade one system while the other one is still, up and running, then you'll want to back up the receiver database, or just not set this variable. We'll press enter. We'll ask for the sudo password or the become password, and then your vault password. And now Ansible is running through the playbook. All right, looks like the Ansible playbook to enable DR has finished. We have no failures. If there were any failures, there would be an error message with tips on what to check for to see why the error did occur. Let's go ahead and check the status of our DR by running sudo, and then within the user bin directory, there's now a res dr status binary. And when we run that, it will show that the Postgres replication is running as well as the file replication is running. And then we can also check that the file sync is up and running by checking the resilient-file sync service. And you see here it is active and running. It's running the lsyncd package that we installed in the beginning, and it's running this Lua file. All right, so that does it for enabling disaster recovery on the Curator SOAR platform. To recap, in this video, we did set up the Ansible inventory files, which tells the system about itself as well as its secondary system. And then we set up the vault files, which sets up the SSL Postgres information for the Ansible playbook to run through. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, see you on the next video.